Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the fourth webinar in our series about New Hampshire's statewide Cyanobacteria Plan. The purpose of this plan is to help prevent the increase of cyanobacteria blooms here in New Hampshire and to spread awareness about blooms and the risks that they pose. Today, we will be hearing a couple of case studies showing solutions that can be implemented at the municipal level. My name is Nisa Marks, and I will be your moderator today. A few housekeeping items before we delve in. This webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording with you by email, and it will also be posted on the DES website within the next few days. All attendees are in listen-only mode, meaning that you do not have access to your microphone or your webcam. However, you can type questions into the question box at any point in time, and we do encourage you to do so. After our three presentations, and we will answer as many questions from that question box as we can before 1 o'clock. Again, you can type your questions into that question box at any point in time. So with that, I will hand things over to Erin Holmes, our Watershed Management Bureau Administrator, for a welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Nisa. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on our fourth and final webinar in this series around the New Hampshire statewide Cyanobacteria Plan. I just want to take a quick moment to thank the NHDES staff that have really made this possible for you all since we started back in January. And personally thank Dave Niels, who will be speaking as well this morning, Kate Hastings, Nisa Marks, Michelle Condon, and Amy Smagula. They've put a lot of work into developing this series and the content and executing it for you all. They've pulled in some great speakers to talk about the Soak Up the Rain program and New Hampshire Lakes Lake Smart program. That was in our third webinar. And then today, recruiting speakers to tell their stories around what can be done at the municipal level when we're trying to address nutrient inputs into lakes. So all of the work that they've done is, I just wanted to make sure that everybody is aware and how much I appreciate the efforts that they've done. We've also appreciated the engagement. I'm looking at the attendee list. We have about 77 people online right now. We've seen well over 100 registered and attending these webinar series. And you all have asked so many great questions along the way. And I just want you to know that our assistance doesn't stop today. This is really just the first big outreach on the plan to get everybody on the same page as we start talking about the tactics and actions that we can put into place to help reduce and mitigate cyanobacteria. And we want you to know that we're committed to keeping you informed and engaged as we strive to meet this goal. And so with that, again, thank you to Dave, Kate, Nisa, Michelle, and Amy, and I will turn it over now to Dave Niels. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Erin. I hope everybody can hear me. My name is David Niels. I'm the Chief Aquatic Biologist here at DES. Very happy that you guys could join us for our fourth webinar in the Cyanobacteria Plan webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about municipal actions to reduce nutrient inputs. Again, my name is David Niels. We have a couple of additional speakers here. They're going to present some case studies. David Blundell from Cobbetts Pond and Brad Roscoe, who's been working down in Chesterfield on their watershed subcommittee. So again, my job here is to sort of tee things up for Dave and Brad, and I'll go ahead and start that right now. So I thought I'd just start with a webinar series recap. Erin did a nice job of thanking everybody, but just in case you haven't been present for all of the webinars so far, it started off back in January. It seems like a long time ago now. And we provided a quick overview of the Cyanobacteria Plan, and that is posted online for those of you who haven't found it yet. I would encourage you to do so. You can reach out to me directly, and I can give you a web link for that if you'd like. The second presentation was given by our Cyano czar, as I like to call her, Kate Hastings. She gave us a really nice background technical discussion on cyanobacteria and the things you can do to help and the things that she does to monitor cyanobacteria statewide. The third webinar was introduced by Nisa Marks, and we had presentations from DES, the New Hampshire SOAK program, and then New Hampshire Lakes, talking about their Lake Smart program. And then today we're going to talk about one of the things that was really highlighted in the Cyanobacteria Plan, and that is nutrient reductions through municipal actions rather than things that homeowners can do. So this would be a sort of a larger scale effort to reduce external nutrient inputs to our water bodies. So again, just to get folks oriented here, this is our statewide cyanobacteria plan, a quick summary. It is really focused on four strategies, sorry. The first one, and one that we'll be talking about today, is develop policies and practices to reduce and control and prevent nutrient inputs that cause cyanobacteria blooms. Also, we're focused on advancing education and outreach to all individuals that recreate and use our water bodies so that they understand the risks of cyanobacteria and they can respond accordingly. The third focal item is to enhance cyanobacteria monitoring so that we can track blooms and communicate where they're occurring to the public. And then lastly, and importantly, is to understand the importance of our drinking water supplies. Some of them are surface water supplies and also can be impacted by cyanobacteria blooms, and things that need to be done to prevent and understand where they're occurring and how to avoid them. So over on the right, there's several priorities associated with each of these strategies. And the one that I really want to focus on today in this webinar series is to implement state and local regulations and practices that address the sources of nutrient inputs that cause cyanobacteria blooms. Associated with each of these priorities are a number of tactics. And if you dig into the plan, these are all very clearly outlined. And there's four sort of tactics that are that have been discovered relative to this particular priority. And the one that we're going to talk about today, again, is municipal overlay districts and how they can be used to reduce external sources of nutrient inputs. So again, my job here is to tee up things and give a brief background on where our nutrients come from. And the little diagram there on the lower left gives you that idea. Nutrients come from a variety of sources to our water bodies. They can flow into our water bodies from adjacent waterways, things like tributaries. They run off from roads, driveways, and parking lots. They also come from erosional activities, also from breakdown of plant detritus, fertilizers that run into the waterways. There's also a certain amount of rain or phosphorus associated with rainfall, as well as leaky septic systems. The focus today is really on this top sort of sources of nutrients and not so much on the bottom. And I really want to draw your attention to stormwater because they account for about 50% of our water quality impairments in the state of New Hampshire. Stormwater is particularly problematic because we know it carries a very high concentration of nutrients. Stormwater also, the impacts relative to stormwater are most severe in waters that drain urban and suburban watersheds, developed lands. But stormwater is not our only source of nutrients. Stormwater or nutrients come from a variety of different sources, as I mentioned. Fertilizers, the sort of mucky looking photo on the top in the center there is a failed septic systems. Of course, we have agriculture that can contribute nutrients as well. One of the things that's done for most lake modeling efforts is to look at the contribution of waterfowl that are present on our water bodies. And we do get a certain amount of nutrients from natural sources. Of course, we need nutrients to make our lakes somewhat productive. Otherwise, they'd just be like distilled water, and that wouldn't be any good for people that like to fish. And so we do get a certain amount of nutrients from the breakdown of leaves and natural runoff from our landscape. And then lastly, we have municipal sewage treatment plants. Those are all very highly regulated, but nonetheless, they do carry a certain nutrient load. And this slide is really critical because what we know about cyanobacteria blooms is they're really controlled on a simplistic level by three primary elements. They're controlled by light, the amount of heat that comes into the water body or that is part of the water body, and they come from nutrients. And when those things all reach the magical level, we end up getting a cyanobacteria bloom, or a boom, as I like to call it. We really don't have a lot of control over the amount of light that reaches our water body. And for most cases, we can't control the amount of heat. But what we can control on a local level is the amount of nutrients that enter our water body. And that really is the focus of the talk today. This plot here shows the results of 37 watershed plans that have been done in the state of New Hampshire. And part of most watershed plans is a nutrient loading budget. What you see here is the various nutrient loading sources that are typically modeled: watershed sources, septic systems, internal loading, waterfall, atmospheric deposition, and direct inputs. What we know is that watershed sources, in particular, tend to contribute a very large percentage of the external nutrient load, or of all nutrient loads, to our water bodies. On average, they contribute about 60% of the nutrient load. And to a more limited extent, and this is important for today's talk, septic systems, if they're not controlled properly or maintained properly, can also contribute a certain amount of nutrients. It's really important to recognize this, because what we know is that developed lands contribute, as I mentioned before, a very high rate of nutrients. And in general, those have been estimated to be 8 times greater in developed land than undeveloped land, especially during storm events. So what can we do to control the nutrients that come from these developed lands? Of course, we can use less fertilizer. We can make sure our septic systems are well maintained. We can control stormwater and household level, and that was the focus of webinar 3. We can do proper road maintenance to reduce the amount of erosion. We can minimize the impervious surface on our landscape. Sewage treatment plants, as I mentioned before, they're an excellent way to reduce the amount of nutrients that enter our water bodies. And regulated industrial discharges. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other things we can do as well, but today we really want to focus on the implementation of state and local regulations that can control those external sources of nutrients. So a little bit of a confusing slide here, but I think it's an important one to set the stage. On the left here is a statewide example of what we consider an overlay zone, and that's our Shoreland Protection Act. And what that does is lay certain restrictions around a 250-foot buffer within the high water mark of a water body. And that occurs on all water bodies, impoundments, lakes, and ponds that are greater than 10 acres, and rivers and streams that are greater than 4th order. But there's also a lot that can be done on a local level, municipality-based regulations. The state has established a framework to adopt additional regulations. Stormwater utilities, which we don't have any currently in the state of New Hampshire, are fees that are collected on sewer, similar to sewer bills that are used to manage stormwater. The framework to establish a stormwater utility is clearly laid out in RSA 149I. What we're really talking about today is this idea of overlay districts, and they're considered innovative land use practices. And that's the framework for that is established in RSA. Those are our laws, 674, section 21. Overlay districts are really in addition to base town ordinances. And if you look at the little map there in the lower left, the bottom layer is just a map of the town. The second layer up would be the town-wide ordinances that are established. Those are our typical zoning ordinances that apply state or municipality-wide. On top of that is what we consider a municipal overlay district. Those would add additional regulations specific to certain activities. Examples of overlay districts are a shorefront overlay in a particular town, a wetland overlay, a groundwater overlay, a floodplain overlay, or even a historic district overlay. There's many different types of overlay districts that can be developed. So I want to talk about a little bit about the pros and cons of an overlay district. The map here just is an example of a groundwater protection overlay district for the town of Warner. The different colored backgrounds show the typical town zoning ordinances. And then that orange outline there is showing the proposed groundwater overlay district. So some advantages of having an overlay district are they add additional protections beyond the town-wide ordinances. They cover all activities within the overlay zone. They're focused on achieving goals or strategies included in a comprehensive plan. So if you think of your town-wide strategic plan, that might be included in there, and this is a way to achieve those. They're relatively easy to maintain over time, and the cost to create an overlay district is similar to what can be done modifying existing ordinances. There's some drawbacks to overlay districts. It's sometimes difficult, as with any town-wide or statewide regulations, it's hard to get public buy-in. They also can be challenging in getting public officials to support them as well. Multiple town ordinances, the standard ones, as well as overlay districts, can become confusing to town members. There is an additional cost required to develop and roll out an overlay district, and adoption takes time. You need to do outreach, mapping, and get approval. And it's really important, I think, to set reasonable expectations for overlay districts. Water resource related overlay districts are proactive measures. They're meant to prevent or curtail water quality problems. They're not restorative in nature within what we humans consider a reasonable time frame. The measurement of success is not really going out and measuring water quality necessarily, but in measuring the compliance with those overlay zones. And they really should be coupled with other management activities. And the pictures there on the right just show the way the arrows are currently pointing. Overlay districts are really not meant to take a water body that's afflicted with cyanobacteria blooms continuously on a regular basis and turn them into a pristine water body. Instead, they're meant to work in the opposite direction. They're meant to protect water bodies that are relatively clean and clear currently, and protect them from prevent them from getting to a situation that we currently, or that situation where there's cyanobacteria blooms on a regular basis. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our guest speakers and let them talk about some of their case studies at the end of the webinar. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you so much, Dave, for that introduction to municipal ordinances and overlay districts and how they further the goals of the Cyanobacteria Plan. In the remainder of the webinar, we will hear about 2 case studies of municipal action, followed by our question and answer period. So first up is a presentation from another Dave, David Blundell. Dave is a member of the Cobbetts Pond Water Quality Team, and he's going to share about a municipal overlay district in the town of Windham that is designed to reduce nutrient pollution from out-of-date or unmaintained septic systems near Cobbetts Pond. Dave will talk some about how Windham's ordinance came to be and a few lessons learned from the process. So Dave, if you're ready, looks like we're seeing your screen successfully, so take it away.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm here to talk about how in Windham we implemented a septic maintenance ordinance, and then I'll follow up with some further actions that the town has taken to also address the problems with the runoff. Cobbetts Pond is in a aging state. It's anthropotic. I don't think I pronounced that right, but the main takeaways are that of the 5 parameters that we keep track of, we are in a worsening state. So there's been a trend over the last decade that things have gotten worse. As you know, there are many contributions to what goes into the lake, from fertilizer to wastewater systems to pesticides and herbicides. To give you some context of what Cobbetts Pond is, we have over a dozen tributaries. What you're looking at is Route 93 here, and then Route 111 here, and we have 2 state roads that run here and along here. And so we're getting a lot of runoff, in particular from the highways, 111 and 93. We have 2 deep zones here that are a little over 60 feet deep. When we started to see signs of the degradation of the lake, we looked around and we saw that in 2020 that there was a septic study commissioned by the legislature to look at septic systems. And though there were many recommendations and takeaways, these 6 were the ones that were most applicable to our problems in Cobbetts Pond. And also it contributed to actually a reference that as we went and talked to the various committees in town, we were able to cite this study. The key ones here is that, you know, people were assuming that, as David showed, a photograph of a failed septic systems, that's not the only problem. That's a very drastic results, but it's also ones that aren't properly maintained. And also there was widespread lack of awareness by the homeowners whether what septic system that they do, what septic system they have, and also what condition is. There's a number of people that are moving from Massachusetts that are used to municipal septic systems, sewer systems. So they were unaware of the fact that they had a septic system. And the other one is obviously that we needed to address how do we get in front of systems that aren't totally failed, but are not totally functioning. So the intent and purpose that we approach our septic system maintenance ordinance is that it was a fairly concise way of educating the townspeople. We relied initially heavily on rye. Rye was having a bacterial problem, and they had gone and already had published an ordinance on that through their health officer. Also, I discovered that Chesterfield with Lake Spofford was also ahead of the curve in developing some septic ordinances. When we had talked to the planning board and the board of selectmen in Windham, the board of selectmen are also the board of health, and they basically stopped the meeting, the board of selectmen meeting, and then convened the board of health meeting. We got quite a lot of pushback from the town building inspector and everything on what the workload was going to be. We seem to have a lot of support, oral support from the planning board and the board of selectmen, but when it came time to implement it as a board of health regulation, we got a lot of pushback. And so we decided to embark on a citizens petition, and we got some very strong support from the board of selectmen, the town council, as well as our Windham reps. So when we went to the deliberative session, they helped on better crafting the ordinance. And when we put that up at the town meeting, we got 80% of the town to vote on it. Now, one key thing that we had in an advantage is when we were crafting it, that we have an entire Windham watershed district that encompasses five water bodies. But the Cobbetts Pond really needed the attention. There was a lot of concern about what the administrative impact was, so we decided to focus just on Cobbetts Pond as an initial part of this ordinance. We crafted the ordinance in basically 3 parts. One is that it addressed the proper maintenance of septic systems. It also looked at what was what were the inventory of septic systems around Cobbetts Pond. We utilized the licensed septic haulers to help both craft our questionnaire, but also to actually do the septic evaluations. And then we put in aspects of the ordinance, both to address those concerns by people that were seasonal residents that didn't want to pump their tanks so often, but we also put some teeth into the ordinance that the town had some ability to implement it. Cobbetts Pond has a Cobbetts Pond Village District that was defined a number of years ago when we had a failure of our dam. So the town already had established an overlay district called the Cobbetts Pond Village Districts, comprising of 767 properties. That gave us a well-defined who's going to be covered by this ordinance and who's not, because there was a lot of confusion as to within our entire town watershed district what comprised Cobbetts Pond Watershed District. And the final thing was that this ordinance would be administered by the Board of Health with the town had also put on the ballot that they wanted to hire an environmental planner, and that person would be taking over the responsibility of implementing the plan. So the town really needed this environmental planner. They had a lot of obligations with their MS4 to the federal government. That's the small municipal stormwater plans. The town also expanded the participation in the stormwater plan to include one of our CPIA members that's in our water quality team. And as they were going through the implementation process, they were finding that 90% of the time of the environmental planner was actually spent on implementing this MS4 requirement. That soon defined just what the obligation or the impact on the administrative staff was going to be on implementing this ordinance. So as other municipalities go to implement it, this was fairly in line with a number of hours that Rye was spending, as well as the Chesterfield people were spending on implementing this. So we sent out 636 letters, but more important, we also brought in several of the licensed septic haulers so that we were able to craft a pretty good checklist for the homeowners. We got a pretty good response. Close to 50% have already acted on this. More important, we're seeing repairs being done, new septic systems being implemented, and that 2 flat-out fail systems were caught and they're being replaced. So the ordinance is doing what it intended to do, and that's to address many of the septic systems, particularly the ones that predate 1967, where there's actually no record of what they have for a system. There was no state regulation. So the plan is at the annual date of June 2024, they're going to send out effectively warning letters with some level of urgency. And similar to what was implemented in Chesterfield, as well as Rye, we were able to track everything on a simple Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. I'll put the links to the governing on-site waste management ordinance on the presentation. This March, the town also passed through the planning board restrictions on fertilizer and pesticides. So we saw that as our second phase of implementing improvements for Cobbetts Pond. This affected all of the watershed, but it basically addresses the 200-foot shoreline area around not just the water bodies, but the tributaries. Finally, I just wanted to highlight that it isn't just an individual who was doing this. When they say citizens petition, it really took the right mix of skills to garner the support from the various organizations, from the Board of Selectmen, the various communities, as well as the town planners and everything, that you really need somebody who's well versed in the health and water aspects of the pond. So somebody has to brief and convince people that we have a problem and that we have to take action. Very important was we needed somebody who could navigate the various political entities because we needed buy-in from those organizations. A key point of getting this article passed was we had the planning board vote unanimously in favor of this article, as well as the Board of Selectmen. When it comes to citizens voting, when they see that the various organizations have backed it 100%, it's easy to garner their vote. And these are just the three people that were the key to do it. Charlie Marsden is our head of our water quality and runs our VLAP program. Derek Munson was the chairman of the planning board, but he carried a lot of the heavy water on sitting down with the various selectmen and convincing them that we needed to do this. And I did kind of all the background stuff and answered questions on septic design and what the requirements are. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave. We really appreciate you sharing your experience with the group. And for anybody who might be interested in looking at the particulars, I have put a link to the text of the ordinance itself in the chat. So next up, we will hear from Brad Roscoe, chairman of Chesterfield's Watershed Committee. The Chesterfield Watershed Committee was formed 2 years ago in order to make recommendations to the Chesterfield Board of Selectmen on things that the town could do to help preserve Spofford Lake. The committee has made several recommendations to the town, with their latest success being the passage of updates to the town building and zoning ordinances at town meeting. So Brad will talk some about the strategies they used and why and how it went. Brad?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to give this sort of a history of how we progressed through the process and lessons learned and sort of why we made certain decisions. So a lot of getting legislation through is getting down to really seeing the practicalities and making the right trade-offs to the different bodies, just as Dave was mentioning. Start off with Chesterfield's in the southwestern part of the state. We have Lake Spofford, which is about a 700-acre lake, and there's about 2,000 acres, 3,000 acres of watershed around the lake. Now, back a while ago, there was in 2018, the Southwest Regional Planning Commission, in cooperation with Spofford Lake Association, arranged to get some grant money. With that grant money, they were able to do a watershed management plan to have developed by an outside consultant to look at the issues of the lake and how we might address that and go forward. The objectives was one was investigate the cause of low dissolved oxygen in the lake, just as Dave mentioned in their lake, and also to reduce the pollutant loading with phosphorus coming in, and also manage and reduce chloride introduction coming from runoff of the main roads and stuff that are salted during the wintertime. Results of the study came out, and the biggest part of it was these two things. One was a lake loading response model. This was a model of all the water flowing into the lake from all different tributaries, what contaminants it contained, what flow rates were going on, and how that flowed into the lake, and then how it flowed out or didn't flow out of the lake. And so from that, you can get a prediction of how things might look in the future. And also you get an important indication of how much phosphorus you already have loaded in your lake. If you get to some point where you have a high loading of phosphorus already in your lake, you may not be getting it rid of fast enough. And for our lake, the turnover of the lake water is only every couple of years the total volume of water is changed over. So it's not a whole lot of flow. So not a lot of extra nutrients flow out of the lake. They're really trapped in the lake. The other part of the watershed management plan was 74 recommended actions to try to help mitigate any future problems. And back in 2018, the group was taking the Spofford Lake Association, along with some other volunteers, were trying to see how many of these recommended actions they could move forward with. And by January 2021, they made a wastewater health regulation, so like what Dave was talking about. And that required periodic septic inspections in the Lake District, which is at 1,000 feet of the lake. And that was a new regulation, and that had good success in identifying some potential issues and just sensitizing people to the issues of water quality. In March of 2021, there was a proposed zoning ordinance change. And the idea of the zoning ordinance change was to limit development around the lake. And the approach taken was to look at trying to limit development on steep slopes, high areas where the slope is really high, and so there'd be a lot of runoff, possibly into the lake. And so the approach taken here was to say, okay, if you have so much property on the lake, and if the slope is too steep, you can't count that as far as developable property that you could develop. And that caused a major backlash, was voted down, huge opposition, and all sorts of issues about, fighting about town taking rights away from the landowners. And so basically that was a big setback. Now, one of the things that we learned in this process is the steep slopes proposition was put together very fast, very quickly, and people running that tried to get it through very fast, and that was not the right tact. Slow and careful wins the race in this type of stuff when you're talking about these type of issues where people are worried about giving up rights or taking rights away from the landowners. So as a result of that, in the fall of 2021, the Board of Selectmen formed a watershed committee to try to look at this stuff and come up with a plan and a way forward. And the charter of the watershed committee was basically to make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen to advance the understanding, planning, and implementation of water management tools and techniques, and whatever we need to enhance the water quality of Spofford. The goal of the committee was to prepare a list of recommendations. So our power was only to make recommendations. And basically they said, go to it, everything's open, see what you think you might need to do, including runoff, dam operation, climate change, everything. So we looked at all those things, and that was our charter at least. So how do we get started? So again, in 2021, we formed the watershed committee. This was in the fall. And the first meeting was basically everybody getting acquainted, making sure we understood the problems, and most importantly was site visits to test stations and problem areas around the lake. I should point out that there had been testing of a lot of the tributaries going into the lake for 20 or 30 years. So we did have a database there of good information. But there was a couple critical areas in which we constant problems. One area is called the Pinnacle Springs Ridge. There's a lot of runoff coming off that ridge in the lake, and there's a lot of water coming off, and it's not really controlled how well it comes down, where it goes, and there are problems in that area. And so we identified that as a big issue, and we also found that there was grant money available. And we found that grant money was available to study the whole big problem of the runoff coming off that ridge and to propose possible solutions to control that water coming down. And so our recommendation was to go ahead and apply for that grant. We received the grant, the town received the grant, and we're moving forward now to study and try to figure out how to control the water coming down off that ridge. And that's one area that's open, and right now we hope to have some preliminary results by this fall of 2024. Another area was the North Shore Beach. Actually, back several years ago, work was done to improve the runoff coming off the beach and into the lake, and it didn't work. And so we pushed that back and said the town needed to get involved back again with the engineers who designed the project, figure out what was wrong, what design was wrong, was the implementation wrong, and try to fix that work. Again, that's ongoing also. We also used this chance when we're doing the site visits. We updated all the water testing stations, every place around the lake where water was tested. And we updated the water testing plan to address a few things. First off, for monitoring the water flow. All the water monitoring stations were monitoring the water at the end of the lake. It didn't tell us whether the extra nutrients were coming from houses right next to the lake, or were they coming further up the mountain on the watershed. And so we added some upstream testing to try to delineate, hey, is a problem with septic systems or development close to the house, or is it coming from the watershed? And interestingly enough, we found that most of the problems we had, the excess phosphorus is coming upstream of the development, up in the woods, in the undeveloped areas. And that's our directions going forward. We're working on that. We also looked at updating the water testing plan to improve the lake response model. I mentioned that as a model of all the nutrients coming to the lake, the buildup, and how that all interacts and how it might be used for future development. And we talked to the people that did the model, and we asked what type of measurements would enhance the accuracy of the model and help characterize things better. And we added measurements of the water, mostly being at the deep spots, but there's other spots they suggested adding extra measurements for to improve the quality of the lake response model. And so that was added. And actually what we found from that updated data was that we had more phosphorus captured in the bottom of the lake than we originally thought. About 3 times more phosphorus was already captured in the bottom of the lake. And so that sort of changes our thought process a bit going downstream. And finally, we had some testing of the runoff in the wintertime. Look at the chloride runoff from the state roads and the town roads to see how that was affected. And just to give you a result of that, we found that in the wintertime, the salt coming off the roads was there, but it wasn't that much. We actually were getting more salt running into the lake in the summertime. And that's probably because the salt has already built up in the ground around the lake from all the years of runoff. And now just when it rains, that extra salt and it's already deposited in the soil just runs in the lake. So that's something we learned there. So in the winter of 2022, we started educating and reviewing our background data. And I should point out here, we're meeting about every 2 weeks. So we're not just a once a month meeting. We're meeting quite a bit because we had a lot to discuss and learn. And so our education purposes, we started off, we said, let's understand the town zoning, building ordinances, the floodplain development ordinance, and the land development regulations. Let's just look at the town regulations and get to understand those and how they interact with each other. We also looked at the state regulations, New Hampshire Shoreline Protection Act, Water Pollution and Waste Disposal requirements, and the Terrain Alteration Act in the state, and looked at that. And one of the interesting things we learned, and we'll get here in a second, is the process. In the process of a building or a permit being issued, the town had no idea what was going on in the state. If the landowner had to get a state permit, that information was never supplied to the town. And so there's a lack of information flow there, which we tried to address later on. I'll mention that. We also looked at the issue of federal stormwater permits, because all these 3 levels of regulations interact. And most importantly, the processes. Down it takes state processes, how the information flows, who knows what, who is acting on what information. And here, as I said, we were finding that town officials did not know a lot was going on in the state. And so we looked at the information flow of permits. We talked to the town lawyer about information flow, what other towns did. And so this was a big education process. We spent months doing this, trying to figure out how it all fit together. And we also very fortuitously had the code enforcement officer also participate in our meetings, and he give his aspects of the information flow. So that was useful for us also. So in early spring, by the time we looked at all this information, we identified basically some rough problems in the town process and regulations. For example, we found a building code reference to a non-existent regulation. It just was code reference to something that didn't exist. It had to do with stormwater regulation, and there's nothing, no reference there. We found that our zoning regulations had some protected streams in town, which called out for protections similar to the categories of the New Hampshire Shoreline Protection Act. However, these were not protected by the state, they're protected by the town. And there was no process to the town to regulate and do that. We had rules saying that they had to meet these standards, but we had no process for a town resident to say, hey, I need to do something about this. We also found that our regulations discourage low impact development. So if somebody wanted to do something good around on his property or on the lake to prevent stormwater from going into the lake or slow it down, the regulations we had for building codes discouraged that, and it made it hard for him to do that. So that was something else we wanted to fix. Again, I mentioned earlier, there was no information flow from the state and federal permits to the building process in the town. And there was no requirements at all for stormwater management of residential properties. That building code reference was the reference for that, but they would reference nothing. So essentially, there was no requirements for stormwater management. So once we had to put those things, we put together a rough list of rough recommendations to start our work to address this. The first was establish a watershed district so we could control area around the lake with separate regulations. That's an overlay district, as Dave mentioned earlier. We wanted to add definitions of low impact development. Since low impact development was not allowed around the lake currently in our original things, we wanted to allow that. In order to allow that, we had to add definitions. We wanted to update the definition of impermeable coverage. Our definition of impermeable coverage, again, was detrimental. It said if you put a garden in over rocks, or if you put a garden in anywhere, that was considered impermeable. It was permeable, it was doing good for the lake, but by the regulations, it was considered impermeable and counted against the landowner. We decided we want to increase lot coverage to 25%. Previously, we allowed impermeable coverage up to 20%. Our thought was, well, we'll keep it at 20% for impermeable coverage, but if they're going to use low impact development techniques, we could increase that to 25%. This was giving a little incentive to the landowners to do something good. And we wanted new surface water management standards to address driveway issues, alteration of terrain, and terrain near the protected water bodies in the town, which were not currently at a process. So you can see here, we spent a good 6 months just trying to get together the rough direction we wanted to go, because we had to make sure we understood the problem overall. So we had a path forward, but we weren't sure of any of the details. We sort of knew where we wanted to go, but the devil's in the details. So by fall of 2022, the details were coming together. Again, we were meeting every 2 weeks. We had some breakout groups and work to people doing homework. So people were getting information in besides just in the meeting. But we had to look at several trade-offs. We had a big issue of what was good for the lake versus landowners' rights. And that get back to the history of the fact that steep floats proposition previous year was turned down by the voters because it was a seize of landowners' rights. So we wanted to also think about what's acceptable to voters. Are the regulations too strong or are they too weak? In actuality, a lot of times when we were proposing regulations, we had people from both sides saying we're not going to support that because it's too strong, and other people saying we're not going to support that because it's too weak. So we had to try to walk the line and get in the middle. And of course, there's also the cost of a regulation overhead as the cost of the town. So still, many plans details work out, but we need to get the planning board involved. That's fall of 2022. Now, here we're at fall 2022. The town meeting is coming up in March of 2023, and we didn't want to push things too far, so we decided not to push too fast and to put off a town vote on our changes, not in 2023, but to put it off for a year to 2024. To give us more time to get it all together and to sell it right. But there was a few things of low-hanging fruit which we considered we could do before going to the town vote. The low-hanging fruit, or so we thought, were a couple things. We recommended changes to the building permit. This is something the Board of Selectmen could do, and this is what we did to just get information flow. We now require copies of state and federal permits to be part of the building permit application. So that way, the code enforcement officer knows what's going on these other levels. We asked about the location relative to protected water bodies in town. Again, that was something we've never asked before, even though there was regulations about doing it. And also asked about the amount of land being affected, because that gets into terrain alteration requirements. We asked to fix the clerical error of the building regulations. We just asked the planning board if they would take care of that. They basically decided to do nothing on that. And we also suggested generating a list of properties that were within certain criteria. For example, we wanted to list all the properties within 1,000 feet of the Lake Spofford wastewater disposal system regulation, just so people could go look at that and know if their property was in there or not. Same thing with the 250 feet of the state protected waterways or the town protected waterways. That didn't happen either, because the town said that was quite expensive for them to do, and they didn't want to spend the resources doing it that time. So we did get the recommended change to the building permit, so the information flow was there for the building inspector, at least as far as what's going on with other locations. So the summer of 2023, going a year here, we made formal recommendations to the Board of Selectmen and Planning Board. This is where we had the details filled in. First thing we want to do is establish a watershed district where we apply some of these regulations. Second thing we wanted to do was add definitions of low impact development and permeable pavers, so that those would be in the building codes, and so they could be used and available tools to the homeowners. We updated the impermeable coverage definitions, got rid of the problems of penalizing people for putting permeable coverage in there and have to count as impermeable. We increased lot coverage to 25% when using permeable pavers only, not all LID techniques, just permeable pavers. And the permeable pavers required a design by UNH certified individual. And we wanted new surface water management standards for driveways. Previously, all the water flow of driveways was only onto main roads. It didn't care about going on other people's property and into the lake. Alteration of terrain and terrain near protected water bodies. So these are our recommendations to the BOS and the planning board. So now we start really trying to negotiate it out with the planning board and get them involved. And so we worked with the planning board, and after many months and lots of discussion, different changes of views, this is what we came up with our recommendations by the fall of 2023. We added the definition of permeable pavement only, not low impact development. This is the only thing that now is allowed as a low impact development, as something that's embodied in the building codes that can be used for the benefit of the water flow, stormwater management. We updated the impermeable coverage definition. We did not establish a watershed district. Instead, we increased lot coverage to 25% when using permeable pavers for all R, RA, and V zone sections of town. That's rural, that's residential, rural agricultural, and village zone districts. And the thought here was, if we just try to do it for the watershed district, we get more pushback. It was better to do this to the whole town. And essentially, this increased lot coverage is giving something to the landowner, not taking something away. So we thought this was a positive way of going as far as getting voter acceptance. And for anything with permeable pavers, they're required to design by UNH certified individual. We added surface water management requirements for residential properties. For commercial properties, the planning board, anything with commercial properties had to go by the planning board, and they could put in surface water management requirements. Basically, for residential properties, there was no requirement. And so now we've added the regulation that if you are building a property and the building or code enforcement officer goes to the property and visits it and says, hey, there may be a surface water management issue here, he is sort of the gatekeeper to decide whether there needs to be a study, a surface water management plan for that residential property development. So basically what we did is put a gatekeeper in here whose job is to make the decision whether more work needs to be done on this property, if it's a potential problem or not. And we change the driveway permitting process, so now it considers flow of water off of the driveway. Before, it only worried about off the driveway onto the main roads. Now we're concerned about off the driveway onto the property and adjacent properties. And 2024, all proposals were passed by a town vote. I think we had around 80% in favor of this, and we were quite happy with all that. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Brad, and again to the two Daves. So if you guys would like to come back on camera, please feel free. We're going to transition over to a question and answer period. So if you have questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to type them into the question box that's part of your control panel for WebEx. And we'll get to those that we can. We're running a little bit behind schedule, so if we have a large number of questions, we will go a little bit beyond 1 o'clock. And just a reminder that if you need to sign off, we are recording this webinar and we'll be posting a link on our website and emailing it to you so that you can catch the parts that you may miss. So first, a question from someone in Sunapee to Dave saying, did you consider approaching Wyndham's ordinance as a health regulation instead of a town ordinance? That was the approach taken in Sunapee. And the advantage they saw was that it only required a vote of the select board and not a full public vote at town meeting.
The answer is yes. That was our primary approach. We had seen it successfully done in Rye. We approached the Board of Health, which is made up of all the selectmen and the building inspector. The pushback that we got was the building inspector felt that he was already overloaded with work and he didn't want to take on any more activity, and that anyways, he was instrumental in turning that process away from the Board of Health.
Great, thank you. Dave or Brad, were there any resources in the process of assembling your town's ordinances that were particularly important or that informed your own work for your town?
Yeah, we had some resources allocated by the town of money for increased water testing. Previously, the water testing was paid for by the Spofford Lake Association. We actually doubled the amount of water testing we did, so the town was kicking in some money to get some, basically, some money in the game, essentially. And then really good resource when we talk about regulations was having the code enforcement officer there actually giving his viewpoint of an aspect. We always didn't agree with him, but knowing his viewpoint was very important.
In the case of Wyndham, we had quite a lot of work done by earlier groups, particularly on the planning board, in establishing the watershed district. So all of the, I'll say, the heavy lift in that what Brad was referring to was done by previous people. We also had the support of the Cobbetts Pond Improvement Association. Many of the people were for what we were doing, and when we had the numerous meetings that we had with the planning board and the selectmen, we had a good turnout of people from the Cobbetts Pond Improvement Association to effectively back us and see that there was fairly widespread support for the regulation at the time that we were trying to get passed to do septic system maintenance. The town also benefited from numerous grants in building rain gardens around Cobbetts Pond. So we had already addressed some of those early aspects on. So we had the ability to focus on septic systems at the time.
And Dave, who conducts the septic inspections in Windham? Are there qualifications that are required?
Yes, the homeowner is required to have a licensed, New Hampshire licensed septic pumper. There's only a handful of them in our town that pump, and all of them are licensed through the state. And there's I think only 3 or 4, and they've built a good rapport with our new environmental planner.
And Brad, have there been enforcement actions or are there provisions for enforcement of your town's ordinances? And then Dave, if you want to pipe in as well, you're welcome to.
Not anything extra. Basically, our tact was, rather than making extra requirements, we actually allowed certain things which were being prevented previously by our own regulations. So we were giving ability for people to do good things, whereas before the town was not letting them do good things. So that was a large part of our issue. So far, the issue, so we just passed this last March. Anything coming up with the code enforcement officer making extra requirements for stormwater management plans, none of that's happened yet. We're all still very, very recent on anything new in care.
One hurdle we had to overcome in Windham is once we went away from the desire to have a regulation done either at the Board of Health or the Planning Board, and we switched to a citizen's petition, the town lawyer changed the wording of our regulation to ordinance and invoked the criminal code, and that sounded fairly daunting to all of us non-lawyer types. But we did get some help from some of our some of the board of selectmen people are lawyers, but it does provide for up to $1,000 of fines if the town building inspector can't work out an accommodation with the landowner. But we're frankly too early in the process to know if we're going to have any trouble. We're only approaching the annual date, and we hope to get most, if not all, people to abide by the requirement for the pump out.
Fair enough. So we have a question on whether whether either of your towns pursued grant opportunities for this work, and if so, what types of grants were helpful to you?
We had a grant for the study of the water coming off of Pinnacle Springs. We've also received grants to take care of some water runoff of the state highway into the lake, where there's changed in some holding basins and stuff there. And we've also applied for, have a grant for improving the boat ramp, which also has an impact on the water flow into the lake. So there are funds out there, and use them.
And as I indicated before, in Windham, early in the 2010s area, the Cobbetts Pond Improvement Association was able to get several sizable grants for addressing installing rain gardens along properties that were adjacent to the state roads that run on either side of the pond. But no grants were sought for the septic ordinance. Frankly, the septic ordinance was fairly limited and concise, and we had all the resources that we needed.
Good. Brad, there are a couple questions for you around the nutrient sources that you found, the nutrient inputs, and to clarify, if the nutrients were coming from undeveloped wooded areas upstream or developed areas upstream, as well as, how you thought about the contribution of phosphorus from the lake bottom. Essentially, what did your watershed plan, clarifying what your watershed plan found about nutrient sources?
Yeah, so it was a mixture. Interestingly, we had one tributary that was very high, and when we did our initial study, we found that about 15 years ago, all of a sudden the phosphorus level doubled. And that happened to coincide with the state of New Hampshire changing the culvert going under Route 9 that's flowing the water through. And that caused the doubling of the phosphorus coming from further upstream. And so we've established now that for sure that the phosphorus is coming from upstream of Route 9. And before they changed the culvert, for some reason, there was a holding pond there or whatever, which prevented the phosphorus from coming down. So up there is properties, there's some farms up there. And we're at the stage now of trying to sample further upstream to see where the sources are, and also trying to learn about approaches like, could we put a holding basin in or something like that to trap the phosphorus as it was before they improved the culvert under Route 9. And there's other areas we found where we tested up to the tree line. There's nothing up being developed up ahead of that. And we have 3 areas where most of the phosphorus is all coming from up in the trees and basically in the foliage, it's coming down. And again, we're looking there to see if we can put some sort of pond or something in there to hold back the phosphorus from coming from those watersheds. It's not coming from the houses, it's coming from up in the trees and the bogs and things like that.
Okay. And at Cobbetts Pond, from Chesterfield, are there links online for the letters that were sent to people within the overlay district, or the questionnaires that were developed by the septic pumpers? Are those resources available for people to look at for examples, and or is there someone they could contact to get some more information about some of the details?
In the area of Cobbetts Pond, yeah, online there's the form that the environmental planner sends out for the homeowners. I also included the links in my presentation for the various ordinances. As far as the other things, you'd be best to contact the Windham Community Development Office for more detail.
Yeah, in Chesterfield, I'm not sure what's available online. That's sort of before me, but the town admin and the town should be able to supply things like that. I know they have letters they sent out, so I'm sure they can make that available.
And there was a question about getting copies of the PowerPoints and a set of these links. So we will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered with a link to the recording, the slides, and a few other relevant links that came out of today's presentation. So there are a number of other questions that apply to very site-specific things, so we will follow up with you on those separately. We're here about 10 minutes over where we had originally scheduled, so I'm going to go ahead and thank each of our presenters so much for taking the time out of their days to to share lessons learned from your towns. It is very helpful to hear from people who have actually been through this process. And as Dave Neal's presentation described, to implement the goals of the Cyanobacteria Plan is going to require many stakeholders at many different levels. And so we are grateful for the work that's being done, not just in your two towns, but by the lake associations and in the towns of everyone else who took the time to attend today. So thank you very much. And as I said, we will be in touch with additional information and resources. So thank you and have a lovely day.
Thank you.